Welcome, folks, and thank you for coming. I'm Cai Quirk, the artist of this exhibition. I am a local Ithaca person. I grew up here, and including going through Ithaca High School 10 years ago as the first out and transitioning trans person there. So it's just a joy to be able to show this work here in this community as some of the culmination of this project that I've been working on for 5 years. This series is titled Transcendence, Queer Restoryation, and it centers around mythology, gender, queerness, and storytelling. All of the images in this series are self-portraits, and there's more work that is growing and emerging from this series that will continue on that is with other people as well. As I was creating this series, I was thinking about how there are so many stories in modern media that are centered around trans, like the physical bodies and the transition stories. And yet, in so many cultures around the world, there have been stories connecting trans people to spirituality, and in these, in very much more honored and celebrated ways than much of the modern media does. And so, but a lot of that has been lost in modern times and purposely erased. The word restoration that is a part of the title of this series is looking at the beginning read is connected to how this is cyclical. This is creating work that is both tied to ancient threads as well as in creating new work. And the middle part story are tales and myths, legends that inspire, entertain, teach history sometimes, empower us. Stories are just incredibly powerful in a number of ways. And the ending part, Asian, implies something active. Restoration cannot just occur. It is something that is actively created. So each time that I go out into nature to create these images, it is an act of reclamation and creating anew to be able to make some of these new stories. The images are in 3 places that I'm fairly connected to. Here in Ithaca, New York, about a third of them are here, about a third in Bloomington, Indiana, where I went to school, and about a third in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And so even as I am alone in images, or there's sometimes multiples of me, it's also places where there is community around me. Yet at the same time, it's, many of the times that I was in those places, I was feeling kind of this separation and distance from the communities that I was in. And so some of these are playing with some of the interplay of togetherness, apartness, and various aspects there. Some of the images, none here, but some that you can see around the exhibit have multiple of me in them. One of the things that evolved over the course of creating this series was, again, that interplay of ambiguity and liminality. Are these 2 figures or 4 figures some places? Are they the same person? Are they different aspects of the same person, or multiple different people? There is no answer to that because it is multiple all on top of each other. There is interconnection between all of these. Doing the images out in nature was very important to me in thinking about how this connects to creating new mythologies. Other than the white cloth that shows up various times in the series, there are no artificial objects in the images, and so with that there's a certain timelessness that this could be a window into a moment in time, a moment in the middle of the story, and each title that goes with the images is a word or a phrase as if it's taken from the middle of the story. So each of them invites imagination of the continuation beyond this particular moment in time. A lot of the earlier images in particular were in times of twilight, and I noticed how in these times I was finding particular resonance with the liminality in the natural world around me. In the human world, I was often encouraged, might be the mildest of the terms, but to fit into one box or another. And out in nature, I could be my fullest self. It was out in nature that I first felt fully seen, fully listened to, fully understood for my full self. And that helped me move towards being able to be embodied and empowered in the human world too. To be willing to share this vulnerability with a room full of people, with the various people who have never met me, who will be coming through this space in the coming months. This series was created over the course of about 5 years, so there are, some folks were noting earlier that my hair changes drastically during there. Sometimes, other aspects of my body change throughout there. And I've noticed, as I've been kind of coming to the culmination of this work, just how much more empowered I am, how much more sense of self, because I had to go through these processes of being willing to show myself, being willing to be so open. I've also come to the understanding of seeing the creation of these images as being like ordeals and rituals. That I was going out into nature, sometimes in fairly uncomfortable conditions, but following a sense of spirit within. Feeling like there was this compass, like a physical feeling in my chest, kind of pulling one direction or another in the forest or the dunes. It was a way that I could practice listening to spirit and practice being faithful to something that wasn't always through words, and that practice led towards being able to listen better in daily life as well. There are some of the images in here that were perhaps 28 degrees and very windy, and that I might, in some of them, that I was out there for an hour. I would not have purposely put myself through that if I had not been, had this higher, had this, just almost, for me, I describe it as a spiritual leading, this pull to create something larger than myself. And through that, I learned so much more about what I was capable of, what my body was capable of, and through that became, again, much more empowered in my sense of self. Another thing that I want to share about is just all of these, looking around, all of these scenes happened. I was in each of these places. There is not, there's not compositing or layering of different pieces other than when there's multiple of me in there. And so each one is its own story. It creates a story in terms of what it evokes in each person when they see it. There's also the story of how it was created and what the process was like for me to go through that experience. Some of the times I end up shifting my skin color from turning purple because I'm frigid, because that's not the point. That's not the point of the image. In the title there's that restoration story piece, and it's evoking these stories that are creating new myths and legends and places of empowerment and growth for nourishing queerness in the communities around me. Much of this work, or actually all of this work and some additional images as well, is coming out soon in a book with Skylark Editions. In that book, some of the images are accompanied by written stories that were inspired by the images. So, including this image here, And the process of writing that too was guided by spirit in a similar kind of what is flowing through me. That like I feel like I practice by doing all of these photo shoots out in nature, that internal compass, following that directive that helped me practice for those the other kinds of pieces in life. There will be a book launch here in late March with that book that and in which I'll share at least one of the stories from there too. I think not tonight, but just wanting to kind of note that interplay of visual and written stories. I know there's a lot of other things that I could talk about. I'd love to hear questions. I'd love to kind of respond to what are the particular things that you all are interested in, and then that kind of inspire further sharing.
I'm curious about the cloth, like what that represented, maybe what it changed in its representation.
Yeah, thank you. The cloth, for me, was something that I could interact with more and intertwine with in a way that was often more flexible than some of the aspects of nature. It's harder to wrap a rock around me than a cloth. But also, as the project evolved, I found these varying layers within it as well. White cloth has existed in probably every culture throughout time, certainly many cultures throughout time, undyed cloth. And it was also something that could glow and be lit, bring a sense of etherealness and almost otherworldliness in a way that I think helps kind of bring out some of the mythicalness of the work. So those are some of the aspects. But I also, with any of these metaphors and symbols, I also recognize that each person that sees it will bring their own meanings to it. And so I also try to be very open to that, allow and invite that as a part of each person interacting with the work. Because even when we hear, let's say we hear a myth, even something simple like the tortoise and the hare, each person is going to understand that in a different way based on the life experiences that they are bring to hearing that story, and that's going to have a different impact on each person, have a different meaning and a different shift in their life, maybe at different points in their life. Somebody hearing the same story multiple times throughout their life may have a different impact as well. And I kind of imagine that like a spiral staircase, like we're going, kind of in circles, but up each time. And if there's a window out at each level, you're seeing the same view but a different perspective. And so I definitely want to be inviting that, that each person is going to be bringing their own perspectives with them as they see the work.
On a possibly related note, so you have all this textual material accompanying these images. But I noticed that it's not incorporated into this exhibit. Was that a conscious decision, or was that? I mean, you put all this kind of stuff on the wall.
Yeah, I have imagined many ways that exhibits can happen, and I certainly am exploring different possibilities. This series is next traveling to another place, and so I've definitely thought about different ways that it can exist. With the book coming out soon, I also am, there's a little bit of a tantalizing people of come to the book launch, get excited about the book. There will be stories read at the book launch here. So there's a little bit of that.
You'll find out what it's really about.
Yes. Yeah. And it's in the book there are 6 stories, so that accompany about 6 of the images. Some accompany multiple images in the book. But it is a consideration for future exhibits as well to have that interwoven. And I've thought about also the possibility of having audio of it with the work. So that is in the evolution of how this will be exhibited in the future.
Or you could have augmented reality or the text.
Yeah. Yeah, my partner's a software engineer, so we've been talking about over possibilities. So anyway, thank you. Yes.
So I'm curious a little bit if you talk about like your process. So before you're out there in the cold capturing the image, can you talk a little bit about that? So do you like where do your ideas come from, and do you sketch it out? Do you know what it's going to look like before you shoot it, or how much of it's done like when you're there?
Yeah. Thank you. Very few of these are premeditated, as in sketched out. A couple of them, an idea came to me. Many of them I start out with an idea, but many of them I'm going out into nature, finding it evolves into that kind of feeling of following a compass, sometimes in circles around the forest. But until I find, for example, this really interesting tree, like I would not have. This tree, this was also in the same forest. I would not, like, neither of them would I have found if I had not been kind of exploring in that way. And so then when I find a location and I'm there at a particular time of year, I am creating in response to the location around me. So each one is in that time. I arrived to this place and I saw some of these rocks laying around, and the idea emerged and evolved as I was creating it. Sometimes the shoots take 3 or 4 hours because of that evolution in place. I've certainly done other images as well where they're premeditated, and I'm taking a very clear idea of what is the outcome, but that's a different style of shooting for me. And in this, many of them evolved to be much more powerful than the initial idea that I had. In this one, I knew that at some point I wanted to be kind of in this internal space, and I had the cloth with me. I was trying different aspects of just me in there, and then realized that having it be glowing from this internal space inside this. This is a very hollow tree. I can look up and see sky through the tree. So bringing in the cloth, then that was an evolution of the initial idea that then, and several different iterations, even within that, once the cloth was in the image, that led to it being a much stronger image than I initially imagined in my mind. And so that's something that I definitely, when I've talked to photo classes, one of the things that I encourage people to do is leave enough time in your photo shoot that you can experiment. Like, don't have to be running right off to something right afterwards. Give enough time that you can experiment, because often it will evolve to be stronger than the initial idea.
The elements of masculinity and femininity related to queerness, and if I misspeak, I apologize. All of the images have you in short hair. And are there aspects of that, and for instance, as here you are tonight, and you're wearing a skirt and long hair, and we all create these sort of images of masculinity and femininity as elements of one's nature. Can you comment on that in the way you did the images?
Mm-hmm. There are, this is the longest that my hair's been since I cut it when I first came out, or just soon before I was realized that I was trans. But there are in the images like a variety. This is longer. Yeah, this is longer than some of them where it's much more closely cut. I also, and for me, my own personal experience of gender is that I am neither male nor female nor anywhere in between. I'm somewhere off in a different place. And so, for me, aspects that much of society would define as being masculine or feminine, I just describe it as, okay, I have short hair there rather than, But I do recognize the ways that many people will be coming to the work with some of those ideas. And one of the things that I played with too is different kinds of poses that have perhaps different implications to people when they're seen. So there are some that evoke more, I don't know. I struggle with this because, like, for me, it's not particularly feminine or masculine, but sometimes evoke softness or evoke strongness or like these different pieces and evoke a vulnerability. These different things that, when I can name them more specifically, it helps to release some of that binary, and it helps because there are plenty of men who are soft and vulnerable, and there are plenty of women who are strong and powerful and outspoken. And so I find for myself personally that thinking about those deeper, like what are the aspects that we're really naming in them, that helps me move beyond these binary ways. That was one of the things that for me too was really intriguing as I was considering about whether this project was going to be just me or with other people too. Part of it was that it started in 2016, earliest image in years, I think 2017, and there were not people ready at that time that I could find that were ready to be this open and vulnerable and be seen in gallery spaces in this way. So that was an aspect of it. But also, by it being one person throughout, there is an interplay of me existing in different ways in the different images that I think really plays with that in a way that can evoke different questions than if it were a variety of different people.
It's interesting that you're talking about vulnerability because my question has to do with that. The few times that I've been totally naked out in public or even in nature when there's not people around, I feel kind of vulnerable. And I wondered if that was something you had to struggle with because some of the pictures you look anything but vulnerable.
Certainly. It was definitely something that grew over the course of the project. In the initial ones, and I think that there's one back there where I'm in a cloth sack hanging from a tree. That one was pretty early on. That was actually in a public park at night. Nobody could see except I realized later there was some flashing off. But there were, I had my ears tuned for if there were people there. But it was certainly a pretty scary thing for me to do at first.
Yeah.
Even out in the woods where this further one are and this one. I wasn't sure when somebody might show up. I always had close. But eventually I got to be like, you know what, I'm going to hear somebody coming. It's going to be fine. There's one of the images in the book that somebody did walk up in the middle, and I said, oh, sorry, I'll get something on right away. And they weren't too bothered by it. And I've now, in the last year and a half, started to go to some friends invited me to some Burning Man type of events where people are much more open and flexible about just people of a variety of kinds. And so that was some of the first times that I was, I'd gotten so comfortable with being naked out in nature and just running around. Like there was a time in one of the photo shoots in Provincetown where I realized by the end, it got to sunset and I was like, I just haven't worn pants in 12 hours. I've just been running around or carrying my gear around and then doing the next photo shoot. And but then going to some of these communities and being able to do that around a group of people, that was the next thing because I realized I'd gotten to a place where I was so comfortable putting my images up on gallery walls. But then for me to be face to face with somebody when I was naked, that was the next evolution of things, and that's been a really good point as well.
I have two questions about technique. When you're the subject, are you also the photographer? Do you work with an assistant? If you do it all by yourself, how do you know when you have the shot? If you're posing and looking at the camera. And the second question is, obviously, when there's 2 or 3 of you in an image, there has to be some digital manipulation involved unless you're not technical. But then some of the photos are so, the poses are so intimate that it looks like there can't be digital manipulation, that this has to be posed that way. So are you willing, some of that you may or may not be willing to talk about as a photographer. Can you talk about that?
Wait, sorry. Oh, you
The first one is, do you have an assistant or do you?
Yeah, so all of them I do, and there are, in the 38 images in the book, I think there are 5 that I did with help. Most of them involve water, or one of them is pretty far away. This one, for example, is, so I can talk about my process. I have, my phone connects to my camera. So I can see on my phone, I can trigger it from my phone, there's a timer, so I trigger it, put my phone down, and then get in position, but then I can see the image. So I didn't have to hop up and down on this rock. I was able to, lay in the position, take the image, hold up my phone, see, okay, I need to move my arm a little bit this way. And that's certainly been very helpful because some of these, I don't know, either it would have taken a lot longer or just not been nearly as possible to create an image like that without that technique. And then in terms of the ones where there's multiple of me in there, I'm often finding the ways that my body interacts best in the scene. And there's one over here that has the one that has me kneeling under a fallen tree trunk and holding up the tree, not holding up, but holding the tree trunk and another me lying on top. And that was something where I felt like it was right, I fit in both places. I think that might have been one of the first ones that had multiple of me in there, and I felt like I fit in both places, and so I took both images, and it was later that I realized, this could really be both of them together, and that began the evolution of exploring the ways which there were interactive ones. And so each of those is, I am laying on that tree trunk, and I am kneeling under that tree trunk. And so the compositing is really just kind of cutting between 2 images rather than sticking a random beat in there later. But some of them are kind of there's one back there where I'm standing on a rock with the cloth behind me and 3 of me down below. That one was kind of I sat there looking at the scene and figuring, okay, how do I place each of me so that they can appear as if they are all together in the same space at the same time. So that intimacy that you talk about, that is very, I marked out, okay, here's where my head would be, so that the 3 of me down below are all looking at the same spot.